Hello and welcome to another installment of Boston Sci-Fi Presents a podcast. And today's topic is stoner films. And joining us on this is Joyce Gerber, executive producer and host of the Canna Mom Show, and Alex DeGroot, co-founder of The Goods. And Joyce, could you just give our listeners a quick rundown of what the Canna Mom Show is all about?
Thank you, Garen. Thank you for having me. Hey, Alex. So the Canna Mom Show is now in its 5th season. We're on a mission to crush the stigma around cannabis and caregivers. We talk to women in the industry. We talk to business owners, doctors, advocates, policymakers, caregivers, moms who are consuming this product for health and wellness. And we're out there sharing our stories. And I just think culture is so important. And I love movies. So I love this idea of talking about stoner movies and like how we look and, we're not usually represented. So I think I'm a story that people don't really know about yet, but we're here.
Well, it sounds like you're doing pretty well. I mean, you've got a relatively large number of followers these days, right?
Thousands of people, I suppose. We get, hundreds of listeners every week. We've been very consistent. We've been here for 5 years, which is something to be said for any podcaster. It's all about consistency. And we're very niche-y. We're talking about a very specific part of this market, but we're also talking about women and health and wellness, which is enormous because there's a lot of women out there who need health and wellness help.
So, and Alex, you're on a different angle on the business, correct?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Alex DeGroot. I am a co-founder and one of the owners of The Goods, which is a recreational cannabis dispensary in lovely Davis Square, Somerville, a couple doors down from the Burn for anybody who knows it. 255 Elm Street if you want to pop in for some goods, as Joyce has done many times, which is where we actually met and how we know each other. And we know each other because I was a sponsor of the Sci-Fi Film Festival last year and of this year as well. And always just loved movies. And obviously stoner culture is not only part of my life since I was a teenager, but also, part of my working a day business. So thanks for having us here and really love to talk about these movies.
Cool. Our first movie, I want to do a little preface to this because I have a personal story that I really didn't even remember that I had until not too long ago. And this is when I was like 23 years old, which is like 50 years ago. The Orson Welles Cinema in Cambridge was running at that time. And I was living in northeastern Connecticut. And we went up for a midnight show of Reefer Madness and a Cab Calloway thing and one of these other things. And they were giving away rolling papers. And again, this is 73, so it was very illegal. But as soon as the show started, everyone lit up and the place was filled with smoke. So if you weren't smoking, you got to contact high. But the film that they showed was Reefer Madness. And let's look at that clip and we'll talk a little bit about it on the other side.
Bill, who once took pride in his strong will, as he takes the first step toward enslavement.
Of course, if you're afraid.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity. See this important film now, before it is too late.
As Mark, our director, said when we were doing our preview, tell your children. I mean, I look at this film in several different ways. The first one is in its historical context. I go back to Fatty the Arbuckle scandal in 1922. I look at it and say the Hayes Commission in the early 30s, which was trying to put constraints around it. But ultimately, I think, and let me know if you agree with me, this is the beginning of the cultural wars. This is the beginning of like when, we are facing that kind of religious right that is trying to dictate our moral being. Alex, you're in the business and you've gone through the process of getting a license to sell cannabis. And I know that you went through a whole bunch of hoops. I mean, is that feeling still going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this stuff is deeply, how old is this film, right? This stuff is deeply ingrained in our culture, and it predates this film as well. And there's a lot that goes on with the war on drugs, so forth, and really just the prohibition of cannabis that has a lot to do with race in this country. So this is tied into some, crazy deep issues. But it's also really the beginning of the commercialization of the cultural wars, right? Because I know a little of the history of this film, and the person who made it was not some upstanding citizen. This is somebody who made an opportunistic film to try to sell it to make money, and that's really the big part of the culture war that I think it doesn't get talked about a lot. Is it generates an enormous amount of money for people, and so this was yet another capitalist opportunity to sort of gain off of the prohibition of cannabis. And I find the film almost unwatchable. It's such a B movie, but what an incredible sort of legacy, because as we know, this movie was used to, like you saw it in '73, to try to bring about the end of this prohibition, and done through this sort of hilariously bad movie. Which makes cannabis look not only insane, but I think we'd said before, kind of fun. I mean, she's amazing with the piano. I don't know if she was
I
before.
want to go to that party.
Yeah, we want to go to these parties, and I wish my weed did that. We'd sell a lot more of it. But it's just a funny moment in time that has continued to have legs, and it just sort of shows you that you can make a really shitty movie, but if it touches on some stuff, it might just live forever. So I find it just fascinating. Yeah.
And even just the way you introduce, cultures all around us, you don't even know it just exists, and that everyone's drinking and smoking cigarettes. Again, another marketing idea. I don't know. I think it feels like everything in our world is marketed. Everything is these stories that we tell ourselves, and the story we were telling ourselves 100 years ago, which I say we're living in the anomaly in history. I can give you 10,000 years of cannabis history in 15 minutes if you really want to hear it. But, we came to this period in time, and there were people who were able to create this narrative through policy work, through culture, through whatever else has happened. Movies were a very important part of this, about what people believed and saw. And, Reefer Madness, I mean, I think they just look drunk, or maybe having some psychedelic hallucination, but that's not what marijuana does.
They weren't really smoking marijuana.
No, and maybe it'd be interesting to know if they ever had, and if anybody involved with the movie ever actually had. But it didn't matter, right? The point of the movie is that it's schlocky scare that was going to run in hundreds of theaters all across the Bible Belt as a target audience, and it worked. It's
devil's lettuce. Can't have them have it. Yep.
Right. But I think that what I love too is that the time period, it's so stylized, right? Everybody's dressed so amazingly, and life is so casually sort of luxurious in many ways. So it's sort of a nostalgic thing, even though it's so absurd. It kind of makes you feel like, God, it must have been fun to smoke weed back then when it was truly bizarre and just so different from today. And again, not a nostalgia for the time, but maybe for the innocence that came with it.
Hey Joyce, do you think a movie like Reefer Madness hurt people? And I say that in context of the fact that one of your imperatives is to wellness and help people. And because we've made this drug a demon drug.
Plant. We made a plant. We demonized the plant.
Yeah. I mean, did that hurt people in the long run?
Absolutely, it hurt people. And just like, Alex was saying, all this is rooted in policy and decisions by certain people at certain times. So if you look at the history of hemp, specifically, at the founding of our country, or before the founding, 1619, when we brought enslaved people over, who was growing this product? Who was who was actually growing it? Who had the knowledge? So it's so deep, like Alex was saying, it's so deep, and the reasons why things were looked the way they do, or for I don't know. It's something that we needed. It was always part of our culture. We made things out of it. We ate it. We used it for our own wellness. Obviously, they used all the seeds and the oils. They knew how to use this. It's not like we discovered this all of a sudden now. It always existed. And then 100 years, we really took it out of our systems. We took it out of the market, and we criminalized it, and we put people in jail for it. So yeah, there's a lot of damage that was done by this.
Yeah, obviously, we find this funny because of how absurd it is. Lots of people took this very seriously and had insane notions about cannabis use that still probably persists to this day, not directly from it, but almost directly from it, because it is such a sort of high watermark for cannabis absurdity, as well as sort of when it was, the prohibition started, when it was at its sort of most violent. So yeah, it's probably had an enormously bad damage, from psychological damage to actual, people in jail, lives ruined, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the pivot points in the cannabis history was in 1969 when Dennis Hopper made Easy Rider, and it went to Cannes, and it won at Cannes. And let's take a look at a clip from Easy Rider. There's been a lot of people who have written and talked about Easy Rider on a lot of different levels. But one of the things I want to talk about first is I love the Pusher Man song.
Oh, God, I was about to say, God damn, that's such a good song.
And what I want to do is I want to take the Jardiance ad that is on TV with all these people dancing around and put the Pusher Man song on instead as an overlay, because I think of Big Pharma as Pusher Man. But well, I mean, I don't know.
No, I do. I'm like, I'm with you.
No arguments here.
Yeah, I mean,
I get a lot of the stories I share are people who are using this as, using cannabis to reduce their need for pharmaceuticals, because it's a serious issue. And a lot of people are nervous about it. I've talked to more nurses and medical professionals who are talking about it. And this is a really important part of this, that we've become very dependent on something that we probably don't need. There's got to be a balance. So
people walk into our store almost every day and say, I need something so I don't have to take what my doctor is going to prescribe for me for pain or sleep, because of the addictive side effects and the fear of really being caught into that system. So yeah, that's a real thing. They are pushers too.
Yeah. But it is also the beginning, I think, of the counterculture pushing back. Okay, I mean, taking the watch and throwing away is a perfect sign of that. And it's a road movie.
I always found that a little hokey, by the way, even when I remember watching the movie before, like when it's like too on the nose exposition to take the watch off and down. And the other thing I was thinking is, you really better wrap that weed really well if you're going to put it in your gas tank. and then you're going to smoke it. Like, you better know what you're doing, because that will be some flammable weed if you put fire to it later.
So, Joyce, when you look at Easy Rider, what do you see as a film? What do you see as does it have a deeper meaning other than it's the culture war coming back, or the swinging of the pendulum?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of in a similar era. I was thinking about how much I liked his glasses and how his clothes actually look like some of what the young people are wearing now. We're coming back into an era of maybe a different kind of culture. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, so I was like the Reagan Revolution, and I was sort of progressive, but everyone around me was conservative. Like, that was sort of what young people were in the 80s. It was kind of a weird time, and I thought it was going to be more counterculture like the 60s and 70s, because my mother had all those signs up about, war is bad, and I canvassed for McGovern and the ERA. So that was my youth. And then the 80s were kind of conservative and whatever. And now things are kind of back. I don't know. I feel like the look, maybe the feel that, young people are going to do some sort of try to make the world better because we've kind of screwed it up thing. Maybe that's where we are. That's kind of what it reminds me of. I feel like we're in the same place again,
I'm not sure we're in the same place again, because I
Uh,
look around and I mean, I see glimmers of hope every once in a while. But I grew up in the 60s and I grew up in the early 70s. I mean, when that film came out, I was 19, and
Yeah.
that was a big movie for us because it did talk about how we felt at that time. And we did feel that the possibilities of change was going to happen. And the change has not happened. We still have climate control. We still have climate problems. We still have a lot of other problems. Equality is not there. I mean,
Right.
thank God for the elections the other day that, in Ohio, where
But we got legal cannabis. It's coming, 24 states.
it is. It's 24. So, talk a little bit about that, Alex. Is cannabis going to be in every single state within the next 5 years?
I mean, look, it's already in every single state, so it has been forever. But you mean legally? Yeah, I mean, within 5 years, I would say it's going to be the majority of the country. There's always going to be those holdouts. Remember that guy with the goiter on his neck pulls up next to him and blows those guys away.
Yeah.
Those states, yeah, they might take a little bit longer. They're a little more steeped in their conservatism. And they may have figured out how to, like, I don't know, put a little mercury in the water to get rid of the goiters, but they have not figured out how to sort of let these kind of things happen, like a legalization. But it already is pretty widespread, and I think it's just accepted knowledge that most states are going to come on board at some point. The tax dollars are very, very appealing towards the legislature, as well as the people in the marketplaces who even want the money.
It's a great. I think it's a great. Venn diagram. Everyone's got some interest in cannabis. We got health and wellness. We got farmers down in, Kentucky who want to grow the hemp. We got people who want to make products. This is American made, people. It's in America. This is a good product for us. And if we got our act together, they could make money off of it. But the federal government is maintaining a really strong, they're still using it as a weapon. They could be using cannabis and hemp as a tool to improve everyone's lives. And instead they continue to use it as a weapon. So if they could get their act together, we could really do a lot of good in this country. That is my stand.
Yeah.
Do you think that they're still using it as a weapon as they were in the 30s?
They're still not allowing businesses to exist in the way that a business should exist. There's a new lawsuit based out of Massachusetts, I think now, on a constant, the Controlled Substances Act should be unconstitutional. It is, it is limiting the ability of businesses to really function in the state, or in any state really, because of the banking issues specifically, the business issues of not being able to deduct your, business expenses in a normal way. This is not plutonium. This is cannabis. We create jobs. We are manufacturing jobs in this country. We hire lots of people. We're really good neighbors. Like, we have to be super awesome, good neighbors. So yeah, ease up on the business stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say they're way more sophisticated now in the way that they use it as a weapon. Back then it was pretty much blunt because it was not as understood. Now we have enormous departments, that put lots of generations into figuring out how to sort of get people into trouble for drugs. As well as a privatized prison system that sort of helps feed the beast. But yeah, it's an inevitability. That's something it is. A hypocrisy will fall, right? That eventually it always does. The arc of humanity curves towards justice, and in this case, it just continues to do so. But you know what these films probably do a great job of pointing out too is just sort of the absurdity of it all. As you get, as you come into a state like Massachusetts that has done, a great job of rolling out this product, whether it be overregulated or not. There has been no real violence. We are all very good neighbors. We employ an enormous amount of people, a diverse group of people for the first time because we have real diversity requirements for what we're doing. So,
Social equity is part of our mantra. We talk about it. It hasn't gone away yet. It's still a little difficult, but we are still talking about it because a lot of times we're trying to fix problems that existed for a while. The beauty of cannabis being, criminalized and illegal for 100 years is we're starting over again. So in theory, we could do things better.
So
yeah, it's exciting. It's American. It's capitalist opportunity for people who have the stomach and the hard work to make it happen. So there isn't anything more American than a new market. So it is, it's sort of what this country is built on. And when it works, it really works.
one of my concerns has been with the advent, and I'm a great proponent of the advent of cannabis coming into the open market, is the people who were hurt by the laws in the past. How do we either make it up to them, get them out of jail? How
I mean, there are lots of organizations. There are some organizations. Last Prisoners Project is one of them that are actually working specifically on this issue. People, like I said, people who are working in the social justice, social equity realm talk about restorative infrastructure. Again, you never get to build something new, but we're building something new. And if we want to make up for some of the evils in the past of this country, now that we are sort of more woke, I guess, as Sanders says, that we're aware of, like, the reason our country looks this way is for very specific reasons, very specific policy decisions. We can make new policy decisions that create a different kind of infrastructure. And cannabis is a really good vehicle to do that. That's kind of the hope. And, and keep fighting. And again, I think part of the banking issue, part of the federal issue is still that people are being put in jail, and they're still in jail because of this plant. And women, I talk almost exclusively about women and about mothers specifically. Mothers should be able to use this plant while they are pregnant and not be penalized for it. They should be able to use this plant and not have social services interfere in their lives and then get them caught up in a system that they can't get out of. This is really serious for women who are using this for relief, and they don't want to use pharmaceuticals, or they don't want to drink, which is totally acceptable. You can drink as much as you want. So this is kind of like the base of what I talk about, and how do we get rid of that shame? How do we restore this into our health and wellness routine? And how do we stop being criminalized and hurt by government by it? Because there's no reason for it. There's literally no reason for it.
My dog just came over here and wanted to say hi to me. So if you saw my
dogs use cannabis too, not cannabis, CBD.
But one of the films that for me brought cannabis into a more mainstream light, and it takes place in Texas, is Dazed and Confused, where cannabis smoking and drinking and being irresponsible teenagers all merged together. And here's a clip from Linkletter's Dazed and Confused.
Sample of the goods. $15.
Can you spot me 10? I'll pay you like Tuesday and shit.
Shabanga.
Who is it?
Kevin, I think you need
Ah,
some
shit.
air here a minute.
Oh, I'm gonna read
I really don't think that the handling of the hands and the little spray thing
Oh my
get rid of the smell.
And as
It
the
is a
canna
stinky
mom,
plant.
I would be like, yeah.
Yeah, you'd be cut pretty quick.
I mean, it's sort of like, kids smoking cigarettes. It's like, you're going to smell it, right? I mean,
Well, I interviewed this woman this morning. She's talking about how she used to smoke in her basement and had no idea that her kids could smell it. And one day her 7-year-old said, "Mom, why does the house always smell like skunk?" So I'm
Yeah.
sure she could smell it in that room and this wasn't helping.
But you
I
know,
love this movie. I really love this
what,
movie.
what,
I graduated high school in 1994, so this came out right before, and I
yeah.
remember seeing it. And I was a stoner. I was a long-haired hippie, Grateful Dead and reggae listening teenager in the Northeast, and this movie was,
Hope you.
everything I wanted. I wanted to look like those guys. I wanted those clothes. I wanted that chair. I
That
wanted Mila
chair,
Jovovich
yes.
as my girlfriend. To look like that, the scene at the end of this movie, which is one of my absolute favorite, where they're going down the road. It's Matthew McConaughey. They're in the car. They're going to get Leonard Skinner tickets. They're smoking a joint. It's early in the morning after a hangover, and like it's just the perfect end to a movie that says, basically, does life actually get any better than a summer afternoon when you're a teenager getting high, going to pick up tickets to a concert? And the answer is no. Like, the answer is that is the peak of
Well,
everybody's life.
it,
if they
it
ever
is
got to
one
do
of
it.
the high
And
moments.
that was my life, and I wanted it. So
Yeah.
I love this movie and
That's
everything about it. I still watch it. For somebody who is I was always a stoner. I was always a long-haired kid. I was always a obvious sort of dope smoker in many ways. And I loved how in the 70s that was more, I would have fit in there. I wouldn't have stood out so bad. So it was like a nostalgia for a time that was, like, again, very popular at that time. In the 90s, the 70s were popular again. The 70s have
Yeah.
become popular again,
Yeah.
but like the 70s were very popular in those 90s. All that music from there was incredibly popular. And so, when I see that scene, like I sat in rooms like that, I looked like kids like that, and
That's funny.
I yearned, I yearned for everything that movie is, and I still do. God damn it! So
To me,
I love this one.
To me, it was another generation's American Graffiti,
Hmm.
where you're
100%.
experiencing the energy of that moment, of that time, and but what in terms of our conversation though, the the use of marijuana and cannabis, it was almost incidental. It was not a big thing. There was no recrimination really against it. It was just incidental. And Joyce, is that helpful in our understanding culturally of why we are where we are now for a film like Dazed and Confused to make it so incidental?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, yeah. I keep like even like now I can like people just pull out their vape pens now, so now it's really become like it's just part of it. Uh, you know, they were still doing something they weren't supposed to be doing, and I keep thinking like from the mother's point of view. I'm like, they were in the room smoking a joint. That's just so stinky. I just,
But there was no
I think
consequence, right? That
yeah.
was the big thing. It felt
Yeah,
like
there was
there
no
was,
consequence. Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, that like there was not a big deal, right? That
Yeah.
like this was just part of it, and like that
Yeah.
nobody died and nothing really went
Yeah.
wrong. And
Yeah.
it's just like, again, all the football players kind of smoke, and everybody kind of smokes, and nobody really makes a big deal out of it. And
Well, they're just
absolutely, I think it
yeah.
normalized,
Yeah.
stoner culture in a way, and helped paint a picture of perhaps what it will look like more, maybe what it looks like now. Although teenagers don't. There's something about the prohibition of it that drew a certain amount of people towards it. It always did. I mean, what we're talking about here is a counterculture.
Yeah.
Cannabis always had a counterculture. It was always very important counterculture unto itself. If you smoked weed and somebody else smoked weed, you would probably like them and get along. It's still true now. But back then it was really like the badge of honor that you sort of like broke the law, right? The gentleman pirate kind of aspect of it. And so, I think I watched this movie and I just feel like, I just feel validated. I feel
So
validated.
I was like, I was not a stoner in any way, shape, or form. Like me coming into this industry is sort of like surprising. So that like, that wasn't really my experience. Like I knew who the stoners were. I didn't hang out in the cemetery with them. I just went to
Were
my
you a
high
goody
school
two-shoes?
reunion. Sorry.
Were you a
Joyce
goody-
used to be a lawyer, so I
I'm a
think she
very
did her homework. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it killed brain cells. I was worried about it. Like, and I remember smoking with my friends, like, and feeling great, but then being so worried that I was doing something bad, which is a story I hear often. Which, when I come to the healing stories, I find it amazing because we're getting so many messages about how dangerous and awful it is, and then the woman I'm talking to, are in a situation where they're listening to their bodies and they're like, everyone keeps saying it's bad and dangerous, but when I use this product, I feel better. And they have to it's like a head game for them. So, that is kind of where I started. Like the joke is I went to Denver, Colorado with my husband. I had a cannabis awakening in 2016. I went on a tour. I learned about the history. I came back. My kids were teenagers. I sat them down and I said, kids, everything I know about pot is wrong. And they were psyched. But this world, like, that was not again, I look at that movie, I'm like, if my son was like smoking pot in his bedroom when he was a teenager, I would have been pissed at him, like, seriously. But during COVID, I would much rather be in lockdown with a stoner than a drinker. That is what I learned. And when my kids came home from college and we were evacuating, we were in lockdown, I did not know it was going to be essential. And I was running around buying, salves and tinctures and flour, all sorts of stuff. And the kids came home and they're like, there's no alcohol or toilet paper. But I'm like, we got cannabis everywhere in every form. And we're going to be nice to each other. And we were. So,
One of the things I like.
That's a different way of thinking about it. Yeah.
And Alex, you mentioned it is the normalization that Dazed and Confused did with cannabis. Our next film, what I love about it is it really brought humor to it. And every time I see a genre or a section of film or something like art where somebody's starting to make fun of it, I know that it has actually been really accepted. And no one did this better than Cheech and Chong in Up in Smoke. And here's a clip from that.
I'm just a love machine, and I don't work for nobody but you.
That's ridiculous.
The best. Like a toilet paper roll.
Is that an ounce? Like, what is that?
Well, it's nothing like our modern stuff because, modern stuff is just nice quality.
Is that a joint, man? God damn, it's like a quarter pounder, man.
Man, be careful with that shit, man. Is it heavy stuff, man? Will it blow me away? Put your seatbelt on, man. I'll tell you that much.
I've been smoking since I was born, man. I could smoke anything, man. Like I smoked that Michoacan, man, Acapulco Gold, man. I even smoked that tight stick,
Tight stick?
Yeah, that stuff is tied to a stick, Yeah,
tight stick.
Yeah, that didn't even do nothing to me, man. I could probably smoke this whole joint, man, and still walk away, man. Wouldn't be no problem at all, man.
Smoking someone under the table. I don't know, is that something that still goes on? I mean, when I was growing up and doing it, we had smoke-a-thons, and I remember I did one with Carol Spinney once, where we both were trying to smoke each other under the table. So, is that overindulgence an issue these days?
I'm too old to overindulge. My friends do my friends do half a gum and they're like, oh, I have to go to bed. I'm a whole different demographic.
Yeah, and I think the lowering of the prohibition has changed the way that people interact with the plant. I think there's still some of that left over, but I think when things become normalized, they no longer have this immediacy to them that was sort of, you had to seek out a movie like this and really see it, and you had to love it. And if you were a stoner, this was like something that was rare for you to ever see, and to see somebody, making a movie about it, joking about it, smoking that much weed, it was just sort of amazing. Like, you could get an eighth maybe if you were lucky. These guys seem to have tens of pounds of it, and it's always like hard to see these things today and look at them in the context of the time when it was like, these are dangerous films to make, right? I'm sure they were not easy to finance, but with those guys, I mean, it's funny stuff. I mean, they make fun of stoner culture really well. It's like the jokes are still pretty good, and like there's also the emergence of Chicano culture that comes from these films too. Like, Cheech Marin is sort of this new sex symbol. Even these mustachioed small sex symbol of like stoner. And Tommy Chong, like these guys were real sort of genius visionaries, and
they're still in the industry. They're still doing it. They're still around.
Yeah, and they're still there. They're still amazing, and I just think these stoner films, I always I look at them, and I would consider that a stoner film, right? Dazed and Confused, I think, is maybe a film that has weed in it, but to your point, it's normalized. It's actually just about, it's like American Graffiti. It's actually just about, that's not a car movie, right? American Graffiti is a car movie to what weed is to Dazed and Confused. Like, it's really just into, this is a weed movie, right? This is very specifically only about like smoking weed, but then it has all these tangential sort of funny storylines that go with it. But you know, I always think that these movies were really the real bursting out point of it. Like when it really like became when they put this on a lot of screens, you know, when this was these were big movies, and like
Yeah.
I think this really helped change a lot of the stuff that came out. Right, this movie's 78, 80, right in there. They were making the early 80s. This really does sort of bring in the era of change that we find ourselves in today, and I think these films were a big part of it. I mean, for my opinion.
Well, I wanted to go back to Dazed and Confused your comment about it not being really a stoner film. Interestingly enough, it was distributed by a company called Gramercy, and Gramercy sold it as a stoner film, and as such, it did not really work, and it did
Right.
not meet the numbers that it should have done. And it was only afterwards when people discovered that it was a smart, intelligent comedy coming of age film that it
With
was
a little cannabis in it.
that
Yeah.
had cannabis. Yeah. And then to your point about Up in Smoke, and where the Cheech and Chong had been working on that shtick for a long time. To me, they're not too dissimilar from Burns and Allen and Rowan and Martin and Lewis and Martin, Abbott and Costello. Those kind. They worked it. They worked and they had done a lot of that stuff, and then they brought all of that improvisational
Boom.
Energy to it, and they actually used a lot of Altman's people, Robert Altman's people in it, the set designer and some of and the cinematographer. So there was acceptance within the Hollywood production of what they were doing. But you're right, they really did kind of really break the mold and really change the dynamic, I think.
And I think because they made money that it actually had resonance. And I mean, it's a harsh thing to bring it back to, but I think
always about the money.
Right, but when people see, hey, this is actually a huge market. Like,
Yeah.
there's actually, like, as we see today, if you sit at the front desk at my store like I do, it is all walks of life, and that they realize, oh my God, this is a big market. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of people out there who watch these movies. I think that helps. Again, I think unfortunately the reason that we're in the moment that we're in is because there is a lot of money in what we do.
Well, that's okay. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. Again, to your point, it's all very American to make money.
It drives a lot of things, and it also drives some change. And so, it's the most imperfect system except all the rest, right?
Well, before we go into our last film, we put together this honorable mentions that our director Mark Sherwood has edited together, and here is all of our honorable mentions because there's just too many stoner films out there for us to do all of them. But before we do our last one, here are our honorable mentions. I love I love that. That was good. Our last film is The Big Lebowski. And what I love about The Big Lebowski is it seems to be sort of a coda to the cultural wars where you have Walter, who is the Vietnam vet who's been bombastic and angry, and the dude who is just laid back and stoned all the time. And here is a clip from The Big Lebowski where the two Lebowskis meet.
Hey, let me explain something to you. I am not Mr. Lebowski. You're Mr. Lebowski. I'm the dude. So that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness or duder or, you know, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.
Are you employed, sir?
Employed?
You don't go out looking for a job dressed like that, do you? On a weekday?
Is this a... What day is this?
Well, I do work, sir. So if you don't mind...
No, I do mind. The dude minds. This will not stand, you know? This aggression will not stand, man. I mean, your wife owes
My
money...
wife is not the issue here. I hope that someday my wife will learn to live on her allowance, which is ample. But if she does not, that is her problem, not mine. Just as the rug is your problem. Just as every bum's lot in life is his own responsibility, regardless of who he chooses to blame. I didn't blame anyone for the loss of my legs. Some Chinaman took them from me in Korea, but I went out and achieved anyway. I cannot solve your problem, sir. Only you can.
Oh, fuck it.
So, Joyce, is the depiction of the dude a good depiction or a demeaning depiction of the stoner culture?
So I like to say I'm a sophisticated stoner, and I am not a sit around. You know, the women I talk to are not people who sit around and like just let life happen. These women are excelling. They're healthy. They're healed. So that's kind of not how I think it was. You know, for me, that's just a person who, I don't know, uses cannabis in a certain way, but that's not what all stoners are like, I guess. That's, I mean, that's why I try to exist. Literally. I like play tennis. I wear pearls. I talk about this all day long, every day, just so like people can understand that cannabis stoner, if you want to be a stoner, doesn't really look like what you see in a popular culture. There's a different way to use this plant medicine and this plant in your life, just to incorporate into your life.
Okay. And Alex, what do you think?
Well, that's a Californian. That's not a stoner.
Yeah.
That's a Californian. That's a person who lives in California. Yeah, I mean, you know, I love this movie. Funny, one of the most quotable films of my generation, because men of my age can take any scenario in life and apply a line from that film to it. I have friends who have done that for years, and there was a time period, but you know, I think he personifies a certain you know, let life be kind of stoner attitude for sure. But you know, I think he makes it look fun. I think he's fun and funny, and I think it's really more of that he's a subversive counterculture person at heart, right? Because he's violently liberal in his leanings as well. So, you know, I love this depiction of a stoner.
To me, it's all what I like about the film is all the hierarchies are inverted. You know, you've got Maud, who is this very masculine woman, and he is kind of a very feminine guy. And you go through the entire thing. I mean, you can look at, you know, the dude, Walter, and Donnie as some sort of holy trinity of the, you know, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. It's just a great film. And the fact that it's kind of based on Raymond Chandler's Murder My Sweet or even The Long Goodbye is, you know, I love those kinds of films. So it's nice to see those references in it. But we need to wrap up. And is there something that we can take away from stoner movies and what we just talked about that is applicable for right now? And I'll start with you, Alex. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think if anything is just that it's an innocuous part of our society that really is nothing more than a strong cup of coffee or a cup of tea. And, you know, it's got a culture unto itself. But at the end of the day, it is just sort of this thing that, take it or leave it, is part of our lives. And I think these movies sort of have just pointed to the fact that it's always been fairly widely accepted It's just not been governmentally so, and that this is again a really sort of there's not a lot of violent, unhappy stoner films for a reason because this is a fairly uplifting, fun, interesting product that
You mean
really
it's not
again
likely for madness?
no, and there are movies that are terrible about the drug trade, but the plant itself is rather harmless
Yeah.
and has again been maligned for years, unfortunately. But I think a lot of that has passed. But again, it's always kind of been accepted. It's just that there's been a certain level where it hasn't been accepted, whether it be the law or not. But there has always been an enormous portion of this country or the world that finds this product to be totally fine and loves these movies.
Mhm.
And Joyce, before we leave, you have a slightly different aspect to it because you're dealing with mostly women, correct?
And yeah, women caregivers.
Yeah. Do you find that cannabis is somehow empowering?
What I say is it's healing. So, a lot I talked a little bit about women talking about people coming off of pharmaceuticals, but also, I'm 58 years old. I could drink. Drinking was fine. I could get pharmaceuticals. I could suffer through what I was feeling, but I never had in my toolbox cannabis until, pretty recently. And you know, that's what these women are doing. They're using cannabis to find balance in their system. This is science. This is not some kind of voodoo magic. I wish more medical professionals were on board, specifically for women my age and older, who we could use this we could integrate this better if we had not offense to the bud tender, but not just the bud tender who is trying to help us figure out how to integrate this into our life. So, yeah, I just that's where we are with
this is where we get to do shamelessly pimp ourselves. Joyce, could you let people know where they can find out more information about all of that healing and all of that caregiving?
So I am the creator and host of the award-winning podcast, The Canna Mom Show. So you can find me on my website, The Canna Mom Show. We are also available everywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. We're also on YouTube this season. I have a newsletter. If you want to sign up through my, website, you can do that. And I'm also talking about culture, just to give myself a little plug. So again, the normalization of cannabis and culture. So it's not like something weird and off. It's just part of what you do. It's just part of your daily life. I have I wrote a canna romance. So kind of like, in chick lit, they always have women drinking all the time. Well, in my canna romance, we have cannabis integrated throughout the story. And it is called She's Taking a Break. I am putting it out as a serial on my website and in my newsletter.
Cool.
So we're on chapter 7, people. But, I have an editor who read this for me. And at the end of it, who's not a cannabis user, she's like, well, they seem healthier at the end. I'm like, yeah, that's because they are.
Well, I'll look forward to reading that.
So integrating it in. So, if you want to connect with me, I'm also on social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, everywhere. And come listen. They're great stories. I talk to women across the country, around the world, and they're very inspiring. You said, do they give them more power? I think it makes you feel healthy. So, for me, being a mom, specifically a parent, was really difficult. If I had access to this plant back in the day, I could have been calmer, nicer. I probably would have enjoyed the experience more. So that's what I think is about empowering, is to feel good about yourself. If you're healed, if you're a caregiver who feels healthy, you're able to take care of the people around you. And that's really your job. So that, I suppose, is empowering.
And Alex, your final.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for both of you guys. I was involved in any conversation with the two of you. Makes me feel very good about myself. So you can find us at 255 Elm Street in the center of Davis Square, Somerville. The goods are at thegoodsforall.com. Come on by.
Well, thank you both. Thank you very much. This has been a really interesting conversation. And the fact that it went over 40 minutes always says to me that it's an interesting conversation. My name is Garen Daly. I want to thank our production team of Mark Sherwood, who is our director, Irene Leach, who is our producer, who helped put all of this together. You can read more about us at bostonsci-fi.com. We've got a whole bunch of stuff coming up. We have a cyberpunk ball. We have our 24-hour marathon, the original Binge View, which is happening in February at our festival. We have Sleepaway Camp playing at the Somerville Theater this coming week. So please go to Boston Sci-Fi. We are on all the social medias, just like Joyce is, just like Alex is. You can also find this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. And before we leave, we're going to give you a glimpse of what our next podcast will be, and it is called Gonzilla, the God of Destruction. And here is a outgoing banner on that.